What's going on, my Guns and Butter family, and welcome back to the dinner table. I hope everybody's had a great week and y'all stayed out of trouble. But y'all, I made it. I've been dragging my feet all week. Well, for one, I could not decide on this week's case. And two, I've been procrastinating so much. But I hope y'all didn't count me out just yet, because I think I may have found a case for y'all cousins. Now, this case happened in 1984, and it took about 30 years to be solved. And of course, it was DNA evidence that helped crack this case wide open. And the determination of a grieving mother who would not rest until she saw justice for her daughter's murder. So I'm not going to keep y'all waiting any longer than I already have. Go ahead and grab your wine, your popcorn, and let's dive into this week's case.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
This week at the dinner table, I'll be telling y'all about the murder of 14-year-old Gloria Pointer. Gloria Yvette Pointer was born February 28, 1970, in Cleveland, Ohio, to her 17-year-old mother, Yvonne Pointer. And just 3 years later, her mom gave birth to her younger brother, Raymond. And Yvonne was raising her two kids as a single mother in the inner city of East Cleveland, which wasn't known to be the best part of town, but Yvonne was determined to make sure that her kids didn't get caught up in the street life. When Gloria was around 10 years old, her mom got married and the two of them went on to have a daughter named Danielle. Now, they weren't married long before divorcing in 1984, but growing up, Gloria was known to be silly. She was always flashing her big smile. She loved to cook, especially fried chicken. And she was an outstanding student at Harry E. Davis Junior High. She absolutely loved school. She was a cheerleader. She had a lot of friends. And this girl was never late, let alone absent. Like, she wasn't missing any days of school. In fact, she had herself a little boyfriend named Deshaun Haley, and he was a basketball player, the basketball player and the cheerleader. They were a cute little couple. They liked to hang out at the corner store near their high school where they would buy candy and play video games after school. However, this all changed on December 6, 1984. And on this particular day, all Gloria's hard work had finally paid off, of her perfect attendance, never missing a day, never being late. All that had finally paid off, and she was being recognized at an award ceremony that morning. So that morning she wakes up and she's prepared to continue her streak. So she wakes up early and she starts getting ready. Now, normally she would meet up with one of her girlfriends on the corner of East 114th Street and Orville Ave. And once they met up, they would continue on their walk about 10 to 15 minutes to school. But on this morning, she left a little bit earlier, around 7 a.m., which was about 10 minutes earlier than she would usually leave. So her plan was to leave her house a little bit earlier so that she can go to her girlfriend's house and borrow a comb for a hairstyle that she was going to wear for the award ceremony. So she heads out around 7 a.m., and then her mom heads out a little bit after her to deliver papers on her paper route. And while her mom is in the car driving, she looks out and sees Gloria walking to school. And she was only a couple blocks away from her school, but her mom rolls the window down and hollers down the street for her. And she fusses at her to stay on the main road and stop taking the shortcut down the alley because it's not safe. So like I said, Gloria wasn't far from the school, so her mom continued on her way and Gloria did the same. She waves at her goodbye, and that was the last time Gloria's mom seen her alive. And she would never make it to her girlfriend's house to pick up that comb. So her friend just goes ahead and heads on to school. And in the meantime, while Gloria's walking to school, there's other kids in the area that are walking to school too. And they recall seeing her walking with somebody. They don't know who it was, but nobody could really make out what this person looked like, if he was her age or if he was a grown man. But nobody ever said that she cried out for help or she looked like she was in any distress. And one student would say that they saw her and it looked like he had her by the arm. And another would say that they saw Gloria speaking with him and she had her arms crossed across her chest. However, no one could recall who this person was or what they looked like. But every morning, Gloria and Deshaun would meet up at each other's lockers. Either he would go to hers or she would come to his. And this morning, he was waiting at her locker, and she never made it to school to meet him. Not only that, but the attendance ceremony came and went, and the winner Gloria was nowhere to be found. So, of course, everybody is like, this is odd. Like, not the student accepting the perfect attendance award, not here to accept it. What? So the principal calls her mom and she asks if Gloria is with her or if she's at home. And when she answers no, the principal informs her that she had missed the attendance ceremony and nobody had seen her all day. So all of the teachers, including the principal, know that this is odd and not like Gloria's behavior. So they're all on high alert. So the principal immediately tells Gloria's mom to call the police. But to their surprise, somebody had already made a call to authorities that morning. A maintenance worker had responded to a noise complaint at an apartment complex on East 105th Street, only a block and a half away from Gloria's school. And there he had found a body of a teenage girl. She was unresponsive at the bottom of a stairwell in the fire escape. When the cops arrive, they find the body, and she was badly bruised and beaten. There was an iron bar laid across her back and a half of a red brick next to her body, which they believe was used to beat her to death. The young girl was naked from the waist down. Her jacket was off, and her pants and panties were only around one leg. Her books had been scattered everywhere, and amongst the scattered belongings was a school ID belonging to 14-year-old Gloria Pointer. They find that her cause of death is blunt force trauma, so investigators knew that they were now working a homicide and possible rape. When Gloria's mom was notified that her daughter's body had just been found at the bottom of a stairwell, she was absolutely broken. She had just seen her daughter walk into school and she was blocks away from the school. She was right there. All she could think of is if she had just driven her to school. But Gloria had walked to school every single other day. Why was this day so different? So at this time, the investigation was in full effect. And at the crime scene, the investigators had found a footprint on the door near her body. And not only that, but there was blood, hair, and semen left behind. But it's 1984, so DNA testing was not really up to par at this point, and all they really had was the killer's blood type. So, of course, with nobody to compare the DNA to, all they could really do was wait to get a hit on the DNA, or somebody had to come forward with some information. So to kick off the investigation, the police start off by speaking to Deshaun. And although Deshaun was in school all day, they did go ahead and collect blood and hair samples from him. They went ahead and interviewed everybody at school, all the teachers, the principals. They went through her locker. They were looking for anything, any piece of evidence that could help solve what happened to Gloria, who she was talking to, who she could have been involved with, something. But at the moment, there were no leads and no suspects. So when it was time to lay Gloria to rest, Yvonne made a promise to Gloria that she would get justice for her. But y'all, listen to this. Because Gloria was one of 4 teenage girls that had been murdered in that Cleveland area during late 1984. Because just 4 months prior to Gloria's murder, 14-year-old Trina Middleton was raped and murdered. She was a freshman at Shaw High School in Cleveland Heights, and on the night of September 21st, 1984, Trina and 2 of her friends were walking home from a Friday night football game in East Cleveland. And the girls saw a tan or gold car without their headlights on, and they did try to avoid it, but the car started to creep up behind them, and then a man jumped out of the car with a knife, threatened them, and tried to take all 3 of them, but he was only able to get away with Trina. She was only 87 pounds, so she really didn't have a chance against this grown man. And luckily, the other 2 girls rushed to a nearby house and called the police. But sadly, they were too late. Trina's body was found the next morning by a couple in Forest Hill Park. She was partially dressed, she had been raped, and stabbed 7 times in the chest. Now, that exact same day that Gloria was killed on December 6th, a man attempted to abduct an 11-year-old girl named Melinda Grossum. And as the attack is happening on Melinda, her little sister sees the whole thing. So she screams out for their mom. And as Melinda's being thrown into the car, her mom reacts quickly. She grabs a hold of the car and she's screaming for him to stop. She's screaming for help. And this is Cleveland in the middle of December. So the roads are icy and this man's tires are slipping and sliding all down the road. So thankfully, Melinda was able to jump out of the car and escape. But when she jumped out of the car, he ran over her leg. And as all of this is going down in the middle of the street, two men see what's happening and they write down the license plate number. The police quickly figured out who the car belonged to, and later on that day, while officers were investigating Gloria's murder, other officers were arresting 28-year-old Romel Broom. Now, like a lot of criminals, Romel wasn't no spring chicken when it came to getting into trouble, and Buddy was just reckless. He had raped and robbed a 12-year-old girl at gunpoint who was babysitting his niece on January of 1978. And in March of 1978, he committed another armed robbery. He later pled guilty to rape, aggravated robbery, and robbery. He was sentenced to some prison time and was paroled on May 11th, 1984. But by September of 84, he was back on the streets and back up to his old BS, abducting, raping, and murdering. So after his attempted kidnapping on Melinda, he was being charged with numerous crimes, and he confessed to the aggravated murder of Trina Middleton. So after he confesses, he offers to plead guilty in exchange for a sentence of 30 years to life. But that offer was rejected and he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Now, I had to tell y'all about Romel and those other cases because at the time, Gloria's case still had no leads. And since all of these other crimes all happened within the same span of time and in the same area, the investigators just assumed that Romel was responsible for Gloria's murder as well. So after he was arrested and sentenced, they pretty much just stopped looking into any other possible suspects for Gloria's murder. And the search for her killer just stops. But Yvonne was calling the police department every week looking for answers. She would stop at nothing to keep her promise to Gloria. So with that, she wanted proof. There was never any evidence that pointed to Romel as Gloria's killer. Not only that, but no charges were ever brought against him for her murder. Police just assumed that he was the one that did it. And Yvonne wanted to know for sure that Romel was the one that was responsible for Gloria's murder. And that's exactly what she set out to do. But for years, she looked at every man as a possible killer, and she kept pressing the police department to look harder and dig deeper to find more evidence. She even started speaking in prisons, hoping that maybe she was talking to Gloria's murderer, or maybe somebody she was talking to in that prison knew something about what happened to her. And over the years, she would go on to write Romel Broom numerous letters asking for answers. And although he would never respond, she always remained hopeful. However, in 1988, the semen samples taken from Gloria's murder were said to not have enough DNA to upload into the CODIS system. So the years just kept ticking by and her case grew colder and colder. But on September 15th, 2009, Romel was set to be executed. And by 2009, Yvonne had been writing Romel for 25 years asking if he had murdered her daughter. But y'all, listen to this. Because on his execution date, the absolute unexpected happened. The executioners tried for 2 hours to get a vein in order to give him the lethal injection. They stuck this man 18 times. So after not being able to find a good vein, the execution was considered a failure. So still on death row, Romel was sent back to his cell. Now, of course, Yvonne doesn't know any of this information. All she knows is that his execution date is on September 15th. That's all she knows. So she's so distraught because she's thinking that this man is going to die and she's going to have no answers as to what happened to her daughter. But the very next day on September 16th, Yvonne receives a package postmarked from prison from Romel. In what were supposed to be his final words, he tells Yvonne that he's not the man that murdered her daughter. He says at this point he's got nothing to lose and nothing to gain by telling her any of this information, because he was scheduled to die. So he goes on to tell her that he's got no reason to lie, and he had nothing to do with her baby's death. He continues on by telling her to make the police keep looking for her daughter's murderer. Because, quote, "It's not me." In 2013, Yvonne's sister Sylvia sees a reporter who's doing a story on retesting of old DNA in old rape kits. So Sylvia emails the reporter and she pretty much lays it all out on the table and she asks for help. She lets her know that they've been seeking justice for now 29 years. So the reporter sees this email and immediately gets to work. She reaches out to the county medical office and the county prosecutor's office looking for all the evidence on Gloria Pointer's case. So, with the DNA sample collected from Gloria's murder, she uses it to see if it can be entered in the national system. But I guess there wasn't enough DNA to be used in the national system, and instead she had to run it through the local state system. And with that, they get a hit. Exactly 3 weeks later, the chief of police calls Yvonne and tells her to bring her tail down to City Hall. And at the time, Yvonne was working as a crisis manager. For the past 29 years, she'd been helping families who had suffered losses like she did. So she's thinking she's getting called to City Hall to help out with another case. When she gets downtown, they sit her down and they show her a picture of a man that looks to be about in his 20s. And they ask her if she knows this man, if she recognizes him, if she'd ever seen him. And she tells them, no, I've never seen this man before in my life. Now, I'm sure we all know when people get arrested for aggravated assaults or sex-related crimes, they have to give their DNA. And the person responsible for Gloria's murder had a DNA sample in the system. He lived only a couple blocks away from Gloria and Yvonne, and he was sitting under the investigators' noses this entire time. And believe it or not, the man Yvonne had been searching for 30 years was a man named Hernandez Warren. Hernandez Warren was adopted as a kid by parents who owned a couple of stores in the area. And as a child, he got to hang out in his parents' stores, and he always had the snacks and the candy on deck. So the neighborhood kids kind of gravitated towards him because they were able to get free candy. And because of that, he thought all the girls were into him. So let me just give y'all a quick rundown of his criminal history. So it seemed like his record kind of started in 1981, where he was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor for carrying a concealed weapon. In 1982, he was charged with drug trafficking. He'd also pled guilty to drug abuse in 1983, and he was sentenced to serve 3 to 10 years. However, his sentence was suspended, and in turn, he was given 5 years of probation. Now, it's said that while he was on that 5-year probation, he assaulted a 71-year-old woman and raped a 20-year-old. And y'all, literally 9 months after Gloria's body was found, he had broken into a home in her neighborhood and knifed a 53-year-old woman. Now, in 1985, he attacked and raped a woman, and for that, he was sentenced to 16 years. He was released from prison in 2001, and at the time, he was living right near Yvonne's house. So all these years, Yvonne had been searching for Gloria's murderer, and this man lived in her neighborhood, literally right down the street. At the time of Gloria's murder and rape, Hernandez was a tender 30 years old, but in 2013, he was a 58-year-old aged man. He now had a bald head, he had a gray beard, he wore glasses, and what makes everything really bad is that his DNA had been sitting in the database for 20 years. So on May 13th, 2013, the police pop up on Warren at his home. They knock on his door, and when he answers the door, they read him his rights and they tell him, come on, let's take a little ride. We got to ask you a couple questions. When he gets down to the police station, they get right to business. Now, it's been 29 long years since Gloria's rape and murder. So the statutes of limitations for the rape charge has long since run out. So along with the DNA hit, the investigators really needed a confession. So they start asking him questions. And they start off by showing him some pictures of Gloria. And they ask him, do you know this area well? You grew up around here? Do you know this girl? And as he's looking at the pictures of Gloria, he just starts crying. Because he knows now that his old ass has finally been caught. So when he starts crying, they really lean into him. And they start preying on his emotions. And they're like, come on. We know you want to get this off your chest. We know you don't want to carry this burden on you until you die. And he responds by saying, I'm ready to die now. Just kill me now. I deserve to die. I messed up. I messed up. So during this long questioning with Warren, they give him a polygraph test. He fails it, and they tell him that they have his DNA. Then Warren does the unexpected. He gets on the floor of the interrogation room and starts showing the detectives how he did it. He explains that Gloria was at the bottom of the steps. He pushed her up against the wall, and as she cried out for her mom, he says that was her last word before she died. But this man is in shambles right now. He's crying his heart out. And one of the detectives says, quote, She didn't deserve that. She wasn't the lady of the night. She wasn't a sex worker. She was just a girl. And you knew exactly what you were doing. And he just sat there. So they asked him, "Did you do this?" He says, "Yes." They said, "Did you rape her?" He says, "Yes." They said, "Did you kill her?" He says, "Yes." So at this time, after all these years, investigators finally had their killer. Hernandez Warren ended up giving a full confession. He explains how he raped Gloria in the stairwell while he was under the influence of drugs, and then after the assault, as she tried to leave, he pushed her down the stairs of the fire escape and beat her to death with a pipe or a brick. He even remembered by saying that it was a steel pipe or a brick of some sort. So with that, he was charged with aggravated murder in the slaying of Gloria, and his trial was set to begin on September 3rd, 2013. So during the trial, his attorney tries to argue that during his questioning, he was never offered an attorney. So they try to say that his confession is inadmissible in court. Now, although they had his full confession on videotape, they try to argue that because it took place over 11 hours, they were trying to argue that he was denied his right to speak to an attorney. But the authorities made note that he never asked for counsel. So with that being said, Warren requested to revoke his guilty plea. He cried his little eyes out and tried to say that he was coerced into giving that confession. But of course, the prosecutors denied his request to revoke his guilty plea, stating that the evidence clearly showed that he was guilty. So given that they had his confession and his nasty DNA, in order to avoid the death penalty, he takes a plea deal to get 30 years to life. Now, at the sentencing hearing, Yvonne comes forward and she reads a poem that's titled "Behind the Death of a Child." And one of the three judges that heard the case, Michael Astrib, he tells Warren, quote, "You're the personification of evil that exists in this world." And Warren himself addressed Yvonne by apologizing and stating, quote, "I've grappled with the deep pain and sorrow that I've caused your family. I'm the one to blame for this." But in the end, Hernandez Warren was sentenced on May 30th, 2013 to 30 years. And his little old ass is sitting in the Toledo Correctional Institution, where he'll be eligible for parole in March of 2043 when he's 88 years old. Now, in case y'all were wondering what happened to Romel Broom after his failed execution, well, he sued the jail. I'm pretty sure he didn't get anything from it, but he still sat on death row until 2020, until he caught COVID and died. So since Gloria's murder, over the past 30 plus years, Yvonne worked as an activist, dedicating her life to preventing violence in her community. And in 1991, the Ohio Attorney General, who went on to become the senator, he hired Yvonne as a regional liaison to work with another woman whose 10-year-old daughter had been abducted in 1989. She had been found murdered in 1990, and along with helping many other families, she went on to create the Gloria Pointer Memorial Scholarship Fund, which provided financial aid to college-bound students in need from Cleveland's public schools. And along with this, she's done so much more, like starting after-school programs for students so that they'll have a safe place after school to hang out. And throughout the years, she never lost sight of the promise she made to Gloria. But y'all, that's the end of this week's case. Keep your kids close and protected at all times, because you never know who's out there preying on them. But as usual, I hope y'all enjoyed this one, and I'll see y'all back here same place, same time next week.